Hi, welcome to my new channel, LiveLaughLieder, where I talk about Lieder, what makes it great, how to get enthused about it, and how to delve deeper. As pianists, we don't tend to have a lot of experience working with text, so our first reaction is pretty much always going to be, let's go to the score, let's go to the notes and see what's there. Problem with this is that, of course, we miss half of the information, and this is the information that inspired the composer to write this amazing music in the first place. So we're not doing ourselves justice if we don't base ourselves with the text. Of course, it's often in a foreign language, the one that we're not so au fait with, let's say, but the wonders of internet mean that nowadays it's possible to translate everything, and there's so many great sources of information on the internet that we can really find everything. So I think this is really a part of our work to do. We want to discover the text and explore the text, and maybe we find word painting, we find foreshadowing, we find what kind of world it is that we're actually creating. And we can get all of that just by the tiniest little detail from the text. We want to see if we can connect with the poetry on some emotional level. So that's where we're going to be starting. Anyway, enough of that. The place where we're going to start today is Ganymed from Schubert. I love this song. It's beautiful. It's written by two of the granddaddies of Lied. We have the poet Goethe and we have the composer Schubert. Wonderful. And yeah, it's full of joy and it's full of beauty, and we go on this whole journey. So let's get into it a little bit. Ganymed is the most beautiful teenage boy ever to have roamed this world. He appears a lot in Greek myths. And yes, he's this Greek adolescent who is so beautiful, so sexy, so irresistible that the gods have to pluck him off the earth and take him up to the heavenly realms so that he can be there forever and they can enjoy his beauty for eternity. It's quite an erotic, let's say, sexy theme, and Goethe isn't afraid of his sexy themes. Sometimes we like to think that, this poetry is a little bit refined and dignified, and that while it can be refined and dignified, these people were not afraid of sex, and so we should also not be afraid of sex when we're actually dealing with these things. So, where do we go from there? So in the original myths, it is Zeus that spirits Ganymed up, away from Earth. But in Goethe's version, we don't get a specific mention of Zeus by name. However, he is described as allliebender Vater, the all-loving father. So we can understand that this is a description of what is taking place. We're going to be talking about the transportation of Ganymed from Earth to the heavens by God to serve this purpose of sharing his beauty. So to give a very brief and incomplete summary of the song, God is embodied by nature. We have sunshine, we have wind, we have leaves, we have a nightingale, we have clouds, and Ganymed is completely stimulated, or maybe even overstimulated, by all of this teasing of the senses, and he cries out to be lifted into the heavens so that he can become one with God in this very sensuous way. And the last lines of the poem are dedicated to his arrival, whether this is literal or metaphorical. So that's the poem. I think we can also presume that Ganymed is very innocent. We get some clues from that in the poem and also in the music, and also given what this myth is about, this transportation, I think we need to start from this position of innocence and discovering, and maybe it's also a little bit of metaphor for, a boy becoming a man and his journey into his sexual prime, etc., etc. However, it's difficult to play and sing all of that, so maybe we need to get into some more specifics. The poem is written from the perspective of Ganymed. It's a first-person poem. And it starts with this very sort of uplifting theme. We get the piano setting the whole scene. So this is our first clue as pianists. What are we going to do? If we read a little bit into the beginning of the text, we see Wie im Morgenglanze du rings mich anglühst, Frühling, Geliebter. So we've got Morgenglanze, this beautiful word which is sort of like roughly translating to morning shine or morning radiance, and it surrounds me, and oh, it's very joyful. We immediately start with something really positive. So if we take that back to the start, what does that do for me as a pianist? Well, I imagine the smell of spring, and it's all fresh, and that moment when you take that inhale and the day is so perfect and it inspires you to have a spring in your step. And that's what we get with Schubert. So if I start just with the left hand, we can see that the left hand is maybe a walking motif. We've got etc., etc. So for me personally, I think we want a nice walking pace. It maybe has a little bounce. We don't want to make it too heavy, because if it gets heavy, it doesn't sound so youthful and so spring-like anymore. So I would suggest, for my personal feeling, this kind of little bounce. And I like a little bit of pedal, because that gives a little bit of a shimmer to, maybe foreshadow this idea of being surrounded by this beautiful Morgenglanze. So then we have the right hand. It's so happy and it's so innocent. So we want to have that purity and that innocence. You see, it's marked pianissimo. So we need to be careful that we don't increase the sound in the left hand. It gets very heavy. So the staccato really helps bounce the sound out so that we get this very transparent kind of quality. Then we also need to have a bit of inner voicing. So if we take it slowly. It's also so beautiful, and it gives us more texture. So we want really to divide the focus and have all of these elements taken care of equally. We see the rise, and then the rise again, and then we're going to get the fall. Like, we might be starting a journey, but we're not really quite sure if the journey is happening yet, or it's just a suggestion. I like to imagine that it's kind of like the temptation of what might come, which is not yet completely explicit. At this point, I should warn you, I might sing a little bit. I really do apologize. I'm an awful singer, but I don't have a singer with me at my disposition, so you're going to have to make do with me. So the reason that I wanted to sing is because what I love is we have the first introduction, which opens, which we've just heard, and then we start again. We don't have the arrival, but we just have the continuation of Ganymed in his joyful walk, taking in the nature, and then he sort of bursts into singing. It's like as if the joy is too much and it just comes bursting out. So what do we get? We get and this arrival on this E flat is just so glorious. And then we have Im Morgenglanze. So I think that for the pianists, but also for the singers, it's good to know that you can really give a good long M to get this feeling of this joy of what is going on. Then at the end of this phrase, so we have Frühling Geliebter. And the Frühling is energetic And maybe geliebte is a little slower because you've got this fr, which gives movement, and you've got the la, which gives relaxation. And what I love is that it's really clearly there. Also in Schubert, we have fr, syncopation and the clash, and then starting to get into a resolution. So there we've already got an opening of color. Okay, so far, so innocent. But then we get some movement. Amazing corner. So here we want to get the swell, but I think that we only want the swell really again in this inner line. Because if we crescendo with everything, then again we're going to get very heavy very quickly. And you see how the texture builds up. So the more we can imagine or conceptualize the crescendo in the outer parts of the hand and keep the crescendo really happening in the inner voice, again I take it a bit slower. Control over the color, because what we want to do is we want to again give this energy to the words. We have tausendfache Liebeswonne. What does that translate to? 1,000-time love, happiness. It doesn't work in English, but in German it's absolutely fantastic, and we should feel this 2 times the double compound word, tausendfache Liebeswonne, tausendfache Liebeswonne. It's so joyous and so glorious. And then as well, 1 line later, we get the word drängt. Now, drängen is to be with urge. So that's why this 8 suddenly takes on this new movement. We want to anticipate this drängen. It doesn't want to feel explicit. It wants to feel exciting. And that's why we want to keep this crescendo, decrescendo, swell movement somewhat transparent, because, you know, we haven't gone anywhere yet. He hasn't reached his sexual peak yet. He's still in the stage of feeling what is going on. Then we get this great change in the bass. We go... These octaves, they actually happen a little earlier, but we're going from 1-5, 1-5 to 5-5. But then we get 1-1. And that pedal that stays on this octave really starts to build up the tension. So I think we can again anticipate this feeling of this crescendo. During that section, we get deine ewigen Wärme, heilig Gefühl, unendlich schöne. So now we start to bring in, well, the God who is going to ultimately seduce him. We feel it really clearly in the air. Mit tausendfacher Liebeswonne sich an mein Herz drängt deine ewigen Wärme. And you can see that there's a beautiful appoggiatura. Deine ewigen Wärme, and in that Wärme we can feel this longing, this somewhat small but starting to build up desire from this appoggiatura. And of course the sentence is deine ewigen Wärme, heilig Gefühl. So we want to keep the tension in this res. Deine ewigen Wärme, heilig Gefühl. And if you really want to heighten this heilig Gefühl, you can think about giving a beautiful H to color it. And then we really feel this holiness behind the word. Now, the next thing, this unendlich schöne, this is fantastic. It's so beautiful. Literally, you're saying endless beauty, and suddenly the phrase becomes extremely stretched and it gets almost quasi-religious. Which is so different from what we've just had with the drängend movement. Yeah? So we can really feel this kind of stretch and gloriousness. However, pay attention, pianists, because this is a really dangerous part. Dangerous, let's not exaggerate, but you know what I mean. It can be tricky for the singers because suddenly it's a very long phrase. And we have this forte written under the first long note, but if we play it too heavy, it's going to make it really difficult for the singer to carry on, and then he or she will probably not make it to the end of the phrase very successful, which is really a pity because it's a beautiful phrase. So that means that we need to take care. Even though it's faulty, we should think warm rather than loud, and we should feel like we're moving the phrase forward just very slightly. So if I can hopefully demonstrate what I mean. So we've got a little bit of elasticity go. If we do it's okay, but it's not as fantastical, and probably your singer might not have quite as much capacity to make a beautiful tone. So, to make it more complicated, I want you to think about moving on the phrase, but still consider that the schöne is going to take time. So we need to, over the bar line, understand that we have a tiny little stretch within that forward movement. And it's a little bit like doing this, but we have to experiment and get there. So, and off we go on a new adventure. Yeah, and two little details which I think are good is again the same as what I was talking about in the beginning. If we get too heavy in the middle section, it's going to make the sound blow up very quickly. So if I show, it's not technically wrong, but it suddenly stops sounding like this innocent freshness of this character of Ganymed. So if we concentrate more on the outer lines, and we keep like this inner voice quite light, then we get the feeling of the expansion without getting a messy, thick, heavy sound in the middle. Hopefully that also all makes sense. And then the next thing is, you see, in Schöne, in the piano part, there is a little accent on the F flat. However, there's a big discussion about whether some of these things are really accents or whether it's a very small decrescendo, which might make more sense because we're decrescendoing into the piano, which comes into the next bar, because we've had a crescendo written, as you see. It's for me a bit more logical then. It's your choice, of course. I don't say that this is the definitive answer, but if I'm looking at my context clues and I see we're talking about schöne and this beautiful sounding word and this beautiful meaning of the word, then an accent feels a little bit unnecessary. So I think we carry on the next section somewhat in this innocence, because of course he talks about this experience, but it's sort of quite, for me it's quite innocent, because it's like, oh, I wish I could be in your arms, I could lie and be with you in the grass and the flowers, and oh, I would press them to my heart. For me this feels like quite an innocent expression still of this feeling of love. Nothing wrong with that. So I always struggled for a little while to know what is this triplet figure, but after thinking about it for a while, I think it's still just this not just, but it's still this expression of this gentle innocence and this movement in the air with all of the feelings that is going on around us, and beautiful. And of course we still have this little syncopation giving a little bit of cheekiness, a little bit of something, but it's not too explicit yet. And then we start going down in the bass a little bit more. Now, one of the most beautiful passages maybe of the piece, for me personally. I love it because again it's got that little bit of religious thing like we just had in Unendlich Schöne. So this kind of quasi-religious thing, I think this line we really want to feel. We want to feel the conflict of this small and the resolution, and again another conflict, and again resolution, and then we carry on, and then the singer joins us. So we've just come from this rather heavenly section, which I just told you how much I love. Yeah. And then we get another one of these beautiful words, Morgenwind. The wind of the morning. Oh, gorgeous. We can feel it, we can smell it, we can imagine it. And then we get this beautiful start of a trill. We can choose to see this as the morning wind, or we can choose to see this as the nightingale who is about to appear in the next line. I like to imagine that it's the sound of the nightingale through the mist, a little bit in the distance. And due to that, we want something maybe a little bit magical. Maybe we start a little bit slowly. And to play with the experience of the fact that when we hear these birds, it's not routine. It's always a little bit different, and it's always very beautiful. As a little call, we want it as a signal. Yeah? And then we get a movement. Then minor. So, for me, I imagine it more like the anticipation. We start to get a bit more excitement. We start to get something a little bit more concrete in the excitement. It starts to become a little bit more thrilling. We get more drama. And so, as we talked about the drängen earlier in this left hand, I think we can put it into these chords to find this forward, because we can do dun, bang, bang. But I think if every chord has its own inner life, it becomes much more exciting. Yeah, as a suggestion. And then the echo, and then we don't get an answer yet. We can imagine that the nightingale might be a symbol for the nature. It can be a symbol for romantic love. It can be a symbol for God himself at this point. So it's a little bit up to you how you want to interpret this, but I like to imagine it as a sort of all-round general signal for something that is a bit undefined that is going to happen, but there's something that has to be answered. And when it goes to minor, it's maybe a little bit the disappointment of not knowing exactly what it is. Because when you have Nebeltal, so Nebel is mist and it's something that is undefined, we can't quite work it out. This voice is coming from somewhere over there, but it's not here in this moment, it's not in our experience. So what happens then? We get this kind of feeling of emergency, but it's not really happening. So for me, that's why. But then we turn the corner and he literally says, I'm coming. It's rather explicit in this situation, but he literally says, I'm coming. But oh no, where do I go? He's calling out to be taken, you know? But anyway, just a little backtrack for a second. In the score, you will see that it says diminuendo. And to make it more logical, for some of you, maybe you already know this, but diminuendo in Schubert can also mean a little bit of ritenuto. And for me, that makes it much more easy, because if I would just do it in tempo, it feels very matter of fact. And I think that when we get from here, this excitement that comes from this chord, we shouldn't anticipate it too much, but it should come really like creeping. And again, with this urge, this forward movement and this desire. So maybe that's a way to make this transition a little bit more obvious, both in terms of technical management, sound production, and storytelling. Okay, so then we move on to the next section. We're saying basically the clouds come down to meet me and they will take me up to go. And we get this whole melodic, harmonic movement, and then we get just like this one big run, sort of emotionally towards the end, to saying, I'm going to be welcomed up there, and it's glorious. So we have a whole series of movements. This is saying, I'm going, yeah? And then we get the movement of the clouds. Es schweben die Wolken abwärts. Suddenly we've got something really lyrical from both piano and the singer. So here it's more like the acceptance. Maybe this is the maturity that is starting to creep in, knowing what is going to come. And what is so beautiful, we get schweben die Wolken abwärts. And then we get contrary motion. And the other way around. So for us pianists, what we don't want is so we keep on staying really lyrical through that melody, count melody, but again, we don't want to make it too thick by making the thumb too obvious. It gets too notey, but then he says, me, I'm going up, I'm going to be taken, umfangen. It's fantastic. Upwards to your bosom, allliebender Vater, oh loving Father. So again, we've got this rise, we've got the drängen, we've got the movement, we've got the exciting, and then we have this arrival. For the first time, we actually have some kind of arrival. It's not a full arrival because we still carry on, but maybe this is like a sort of mini first climax, a mini first recognition, a mini first understanding of boy becoming man, etc., etc. I think you can follow where I'm going with this. So we have da, 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 da. Again, quasi-religious. Finally we have some kind of release here. But then we start again and we do all the journey all over again. The clouds are coming again to get to the love and to take him up. Mir, mir in eurem Schoße. It's glorious. Here it gets difficult because we need to have the tension of going up without getting too stressed, because the lines that come afterwards for the singer are very, very long and very difficult after we've been very excited and very busy. So that means that at the bottom of the page, when you have that's already difficult by itself, but then you get I cheated that a little bit. Should I try that again? Then you get such a long line, and it goes high and it goes low and so our problem is that if we do it too heavy, again we make it even more heavy for the singer to get through. So it's the same principle as we talked about earlier. We need to keep it flowing. So we don't want because that's killing, and your singer will probably not make it, and you'll get at the end. It's not really fun to finish this beautiful moment of arrival, nudge nudge, wink wink, in its truest form. Yeah, so that means that especially when we get to these last two chords, we really need to anticipate, feel where the breath is going. I say it a lot, one of the best ways that we can prepare that is by singing it ourselves, which is why I show you with my utterly dreadful singing, because if I cannot sing it, then I have no understanding of how the line is formed. So you can sing in the privacy of your own practice room. No one's going to judge you. But understanding where the line is going really helps you be a better accompanist at such a moment, or even better said, a better collaborative pianist, because you're really taking responsibility for what is going on at that moment. And then your singer will love you forever and everything will be glorious, and your singer will repay you by looking very concentrated as you make your final musical descent up into heaven. And singers, please don't let us down. We need you to give us the fullest concentration so we can make our complete journey all the way up as we get this. Fermata, fermata in the silence, don't let any of the tension go, and then we release. If we release too early, then it's a pity, because we want everybody to stay in this heavenly, dare I say, erotic energy of the fact that Ganymed has succeeded in his journey from some little innocent teenager happily walking along in spring, not knowing why his senses were being aroused, to actually being completely transported in every sense, metaphorical, literal, physical, all the rest of it, into the arms of the all-loving Father. So, isn't this just such a glorious song? So I hope you can feel where I'm going with this, and I hope that it can maybe give you some inspiration to make your own discoveries in this fantastic text and fantastic music. And yeah, that is my very, very incomplete whirlwind guide to making a small introduction to Ganymed. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye from Live, Laugh, Leader.